Hello, my name's Yale Stevens, and here we are at the end of another election campaign. I wasn't sure whether I would get the opportunity to film a video comment this afternoon. As my readers would know, I haven't been particularly well. That's what happens when you have small children who bring undesirable diseases into the house. But anyway, we'll have a go and we'll see how far we get. It's been a long campaign, and it's very good to see that it's finally over. Obviously, by this time tomorrow, the decision will have been made, and we'll have some indication as to who's won the election, hopefully. I really wanted to have a bit of a chat this afternoon and just talk through some of the considerations that are going to influence the result of this election as it plays out. The polls are telling a very interesting story of a cliffhanger, as polls so often do these days. The aggregate across the major polls as it stands this afternoon, without a final news poll in the mix, is roughly 50.5% to the coalition. That, of course, equates to a swing that's insufficient to elect the Labor Party and Mr Shorten as Prime Minister, and it is to be hoped that the result is that side of the ledger, or even more decisive for the coalition. It's been a very difficult election to pick. I tend to suspect that the polls have been not entirely straightforward in the message that they have conveyed. Obviously, on this occasion, there are some other factors like the rise of Nick Xenophon, a trend away from the major parties generally, the re-emergence of red herrings like Pauline Hanson, and the emergence of some very credible single issue candidates like Derryn Hinch as a Senate candidate here in Victoria. As far as the state-by-state results are concerned, I would expect to see the government largely hold its own in Queensland. My sources inside the LNP in Queensland tell me that they're very concerned about Capricornia and Flynn in particular. Around Brisbane, the consensus seems to be that the government's holding its line. And should Luke Howarth be re-elected in Petrie, which sits on a margin of just 0.5%, I would tend to take that as a very clear sign that the Liberal Party will hold most of its marginal seats in and around Brisbane. There is the possibility of picking up Moreton on a 1.7% margin in the inner southern suburbs of Brisbane, and also Kevin Rudd's old seat of Griffith on the same margin, right next door to Moreton. And should either or both of those seats fall to the coalition, it'll be an early sign that Labor will be having a very bad night indeed. The other seat that I would dearly love to keep an eye on is the seat of Lillie, which is held by Wayne Swan. And as regular readers of this column know, I have no time whatsoever for Wayne Swan, and I think he is a drain on the public purse to take a $200,000 a year salary, when quite clearly he was a failure as treasurer under Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard, and he is, to use the vernacular, washed up. New South Wales will be a different story. I expect to see a lot of seats lost to Labor in New South Wales, possibly as many as 8 seats. Some of those have already been made notionally Labor, of course, through the redistribution, but the overwhelming majority of those seats that were gained, and I've just seen that I've got a helper. This is my daughter, Zara, who's been told to let Daddy talk in quiet. You can just say hello, Zara Zoo, but off you go. We're having a serious conversation here. I'd expect to see a much more even outcome in New South Wales. In South Australia, of course, there are seats that are under siege from Nick Xenophon. Nobody really knows how that's going to play out. There are some polls that are showing that the Xenophon team will outpoll Labor in South Australia, which is certainly highly possible. I tend to think that the Liberals will hold both Sturt and Mayo against the onslaught, but that's one opinion. Of course, there are others that tend to think that Nick Xenophon's candidates will win either or both of those seats. In Western Australia, the only seat that's being shown on polling as a likely gain for Labor is Burt, the new and notionally Liberal seat on paper, but of course sources from both sides are saying that they're detecting a significant movement to Labor in that seat. There are other seats in and around Perth, particularly Hasluck, which are at risk of falling to Labor. And Western Australia is the one state where not only is there a Liberal state government, but that state government is, of course, deeply unpopular, 9 months out from a state election, which it should on paper be tracking to win quite comfortably, having scored a massive win 3.5 years ago. But of course, time changes, and that's what we have elections every 4 years for in each of the states. In Tasmania, I expect very little movement. The seat that's likeliest to fall to Labor in Tasmania is, of course, Lyons, being held on a very slender margin after the last election. I'd expect that Bass will be retained by the Liberal Party, and in all probability Braddon as well. Here in Victoria, we have a slightly different situation in play. A hand grenade's been lobbed into the federal Labor campaign courtesy of the Premier of Victoria, Daniel Andrews, who has chosen this moment to attempt to facilitate a takeover of the Country Fire Authority by the uber left-wing union, the United Firefighters Union. Many people are suggesting that Andrews has chosen his time awfully, lobbing a hand grenade into Bill Shorten's campaign as it has. I take the opposite view, that Daniel Andrews has actually chosen his timing very, very cleverly, because he's using the cover of a federal election campaign to attempt to detract from the negative publicity that might have been expected to be generated by the CFA issue. And of course, it hasn't worked. Everybody on the street in Melbourne is talking about the CFA takeover. Everybody has an opinion on it. Public opinion overwhelmingly seems to be with the volunteers at the CFA and against the UFU and Daniel Andrews. And if Labor does lose the election tomorrow, which we expect, but only loses by a small handful of seats, it's quite likely that Victoria will have played the pivotal role in that contest. Here in Victoria, there are a small number of marginal seats held by Labor in Melbourne, in Bruce and in Isaacs, which are being viewed as potential gains by the Liberal Party. A little bit further up the pendulum sits Chisholm, which is, of course, is the seat held by departing former Speaker Anna Burke. I rate the Liberal Party a chance in all three of those seats. There's some suggestion that the seat of Jagga Jagga, which of course is held by Jenny Macklin and very marginal in Melbourne's inner north, could also be in play. In addition to those seats in Melbourne, the seats of Ballarat and Bendigo are very much affected by the dispute over the CFA's enterprise bargaining agreement, and Bendigo in particular, which is being contested by a friend of mine in Megan Purcell for the Liberal Party, has to be penciled in as a potential gain when the votes are counted tomorrow night. Looking at some of the independents, the seat of Indi, where Sophie Mirabella is aiming to stage a comeback, I don't expect that venture to succeed. I think that the contest will be between the independent MP Cathy McGowan and the National Party challenger in that seat. Too close to call for mine, but I would not be surprised if the National Party prevails in that seat. In the Senate, it's going to be very difficult to see the coalition improving at all on its position in the parliament which has just concluded. I can find 32 seats out of the 76 for the coalition, which is 5 in each of the states, plus 1 in each of the territories. But you've really got to scratch to find a 6th seat in any of the states. Maybe Queensland, which I doubt, with Pauline Hanson standing. Maybe Western Australia, which I doubt. And if it does happen, it's more likely to be a National than a Liberal. I tend to think that Labor and the Greens will continue to control the Senate, and of course, if the Turnbull government is re-elected tomorrow, that spells trouble, because we all know that Bill Shorten has marshalled the anti-coalition forces in the Senate very successfully over the last 3 years, and a non-coalition majority in the Senate for the next 3 years means it's going to be very difficult for the Prime Minister to pass any legislation, certainly any legislation of any great significance. All of that said, I expect to see Darren Hinch elected in Victoria. I expect to see Pauline Hanson prevail in Queensland. I don't make the latter prediction with any enthusiasm. I think Pauline Hanson is a red herring and a very divisive influence. She's very adept at identifying problems, not so crash hot when it comes to putting solutions on the table. But of course, that's the whole point. All you've got to do is make noise about things that some of the less secure members of society feel very strongly about. And this is her 10th attempt at a seat in Parliament since losing in 1998. Excuse me. Overall, I expect the Turnbull government to be re-elected with 77 to 79 seats in the House of Representatives out of 150. And beyond that, it stands to be a very interesting count. I hope you've enjoyed this video comment. It's obviously an experiment, and if the feedback is good, then we might do it again. All the best, and enjoy election day tomorrow. Thank you.